Now that we've created the production budget, let's focus on the component budgets. We'll break down product and operating costs according to the following categories. First off, materials, labor, and overhead costs. Those are product costs that are inventoriable. They're eventually recorded as cost of goods sold, but until those units are sold, they're recorded as inventory. And that has some implications for our budget process. And we'll also talk about selling and administrative costs. So let's continue our Hogarth Incorporated example and start with direct materials budgets. So the direct materials budget begins with the information we created in the production budget. We identified the number of units to be produced in each of the quarters. We started off with 3,625 units in quarter 1, 3,800 units in quarter 2, etc., etc. Now, we know from our production plan that we require 3 units of direct materials. In this case, they're measured in kilograms. So we need 3 kilograms for each unit that we produce. So 3,625 units to be produced in quarter 1, each requiring 3 kilograms of raw materials, means that we'll need 10,875 kilograms in total during quarter 1. And similar calculations can be performed for quarters 2, 3, and 4. Now, Hogarth requires ending direct materials. Just like we required finished goods unit to have 25% on hand, Hogarth has a similar policy for raw materials, just not as much. Not 25%, but 15%. So looking ahead to the next quarter, quarter 2, we need 11,400 kilograms in that quarter. 15% of that number is 1,710 kilograms. That again is our desired ending inventory, but for raw materials. So the total kilograms needed during quarter 1 is the 10,875 for the units to produce, plus the desired ending direct materials inventory, which totals 12,585 kilograms. Given that our policy was in effect in the previous year, we had some beginning inventory, similar to what we had in finished goods for our production budget. 15% of the current quarter's needs was sitting in the beginning inventory at the beginning of quarter 1. So our total materials required of 12,585 kilograms, less the beginning inventory that we had on hand already of 1,631, means that we'll need to purchase or acquire somehow 10,954 kilograms for this quarter's production. We know that the cost per kilogram, at least in quarter 1, comes out to be $5 per kilogram. So given our needs in terms of purchasing, 10,954 kilograms at $5 per kilogram means that the total cost of direct materials purchased during quarter 1 is $54,769. Now turning to quarter 2, we can again look at our policy of having on hand 15% of the next quarter's needs. The desired ending direct materials inventory in quarter 2 is 15% of the next quarter's production needs. We of course have our beginning direct materials on hand, and those items can be used to calculate the direct materials to be purchased in quarter 2. We don't expect the price to change between quarter 1 and quarter 2, so we can calculate the total cost of direct materials purchased during quarter 2 at $56,550. We can continue the same process for quarters 3 and 4, calculating the cost of materials that we will purchase in those particular quarters and sum up all 4 quarters' purchases to calculate the total annual cost, $240,469. So now let's turn to the direct labor budget. The direct labor budget also starts with the number of units to be produced. Again, in quarter 1, we want 3,625 units to produce, 3,800 in quarter 2, etc., etc. We know from our production plan that it takes 3 hours of direct labor time to create each of those units that we need to produce. So in quarter 1, each unit takes 3 hours, times 3,625 of those units means that we'll require 10,875 direct labor hours. The same calculations can be applied for quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Again, assuming that we use 3 direct labor hours for each unit to be produced in those quarters as well. The direct labor cost per hour on average for all of the employees who are performing those activities is $10 in quarter 1, $10 in quarter 2. In quarter 3 and quarter 4, we expect that cost to increase a bit. Perhaps we have more specialized employees during those quarters or more people with more experience, and we have to pay them a higher wage. Regardless, we can calculate the total cost of direct labor. $10 per hour multiplied by the number of hours that is required in each quarter yields the total cost of direct labor for that quarter. So, in quarter 1, we require 10,875 direct labor hours. We pay on average $10 for each of those direct labor hours, and our total payments will be $108,750. Similar calculations for each of the quarters allows us to calculate the total annual cost for direct labor, and that is $526,950. Now let's turn to the manufacturing overhead budget. And while this looks quite complex, the same principles apply here as in the direct materials and direct labor. First off, we separate out the overhead costs into variable and fixed categories. And we go through a lengthy process to try to understand how those variable costs fluctuate with production volume, as well as what the overall fixed cost levels will be. And suppose that Hogarth managers have gone through and done that. Now, as you will notice, the variable costs for each of the line items varies as we move from quarter 1 to quarter 2 to quarter 3 and to quarter 4. And this is because our production volume will fluctuate over those. Given that these costs are variable, they fluctuate at least roughly with the level of production. So those costs will be different as we move from quarter 1 to quarter 2, etc. In contrast, the fixed costs stay relatively flat throughout the entire year. For example, the salaries that are fixed, by definition, don't fluctuate with production volume. So we expect those to stay relatively constant from quarter 1 to quarter 2, etc. The total variable costs and the total fixed costs are summed to create the total manufacturing overhead costs on a quarterly basis. Hogarth managers have identified that direct labor hours is a reasonable cost driver for estimating overhead costs. So looking at the direct labor hours that we expect to use from our direct labor budget, we can then calculate the predetermined overhead rate. Hogarth does this on an annual basis, again, just to keep things simple. So the total manufacturing overhead expected for each quarter can be summed up and yields a total of $373,363. The total direct labor hours that Hogarth expects to use throughout the year is $47,625. So dividing the total manufacturing overhead by the total cost driver for the year, $373,363, divided by 47,625, yields a predetermined overhead rate on a basis of direct labor hours. And that rate is $7.84. The last component budget is the selling and administrative budget. And you'll notice one difference from the materials, labor, and overhead budgets. Specifically, we're not starting with planned production volume, we're starting with budgeted sales. That's because selling and other supporting costs might have more correspondence or correlation with the sales of the units as opposed to the production. And that's what we're assuming here. So Hogarth goes through the process of estimating what selling and administrative costs and expenses that they will incur on a quarterly basis. Variable expenses might include sales commissions or shipping, and fixed expenses might include marketing and advertising, salaries, and other expenses. And the same idea is here in the sense that we're going to sum the variable expenses and the fixed expenses to calculate the total. In quarter 1, the estimate is $40,000. Just like with overhead, we expect that the variable expenses will fluctuate from period to period, as they are correlated with the corresponding projected sales volume. Fixed expenses, on the other hand, stay relatively flat. Ultimately, the total selling and administrative expenses are calculated by quarter and can be summed up to estimate the annual selling and administrative expense total. As you can see, the budgeting process is quite complex. There are many different components, including materials, labor, overhead, and selling and administrative. And actually, we are at a very aggregate level. We haven't broken things down by product line or type of material, for example. But these components will ultimately aggregate back up into the budgeted income statement. And we'll turn our attention to creating that statement in the next lesson.